Hey friends, today I am going to be ranking all of Riley Sager's books. He just had a new release come out, so I thought right now would be a great time to just post my ranking of all of his books from my least favorite to favorite. Now, I love all of Riley Sager's books. I know that there are a couple that, BookTube's a little divided on, but in my mind, they're all great. I really love all of them, and so just because something's lower on the list doesn't mean I don't like it. I really like all of them, but it just means that it's not my top favorite. Number 7 is Survive the Night. Survive the Night follows Charlie, who is going home from college early. She's wanting to leave a little bit before Thanksgiving because there is a serial killer loose in their town, and his most recent victim was her best friend. So she's got to get out of there and get home. But because it's 1991, she has to find a ride through a ride board, through a bulletin board where she could find somebody who would drive her back to the state that she is actually from. And because she's leaving a little bit early, her options are kind of limited. She meets this guy who will drop her off at her grandparents' house on the way to wherever it is he's going, and she starts to suspect that he might be the serial killer that everybody is searching for. I love this book. It's super fast paced. It all takes place in one night, and so I think if you haven't read it, I would recommend that you just listen to the audiobook in one sitting if possible. Since the book is super fast paced, I think that's the best way to take in the story. The longer she's in the car with Josh, the more she starts to suspect that he might be the serial killer and that she might have willingly gotten in the car with the person who she is trying to escape. Now, Charlie is also not the most reliable narrator. She is frequently dissociating from reality and having I don't know if delusions or hallucinations are the right word, but she's kind of visualizing things that aren't there. And she describes them as having movies in her head. There's music plays and things get a little bit more cinematic, and she's a real movie buff. So, that's kind of how they're manifesting. Now, a lot of things that people dislike about this story is the dissociations. People think that they're not realistic and they're not, they just kind of take you out of the story, I guess. I don't know about that. I'm not an expert in that. I don't know if they're realistic or not. But that's not what I dislike about this book. The only real gripe I have with this book is that Charlie is not very likable. Charlie is constantly making decisions that no reasonable person would make. Charlie is constantly making the wrong choice, and I think one thing that also really bothered me about this book was the stakes don't really make sense. This book takes place on the Monday before Thanksgiving, and so she's I need to get home. I need to get off this college campus. I need to get away. She's not doing okay, but she's unwilling to wait 2 more days for her boyfriend to take her home, because if she waits till Wednesday, he can take her, but she can't wait that long, which I just don't understand, because her friend died a few weeks before this book takes place, and so to me it just didn't really make sense that she just couldn't wait 2 nights and instead chose to get into a car with who she thought was the serial killer before she even got in. There's this scene where she is getting picked up by Josh, and the car is positioned in a way that she can't see what's in the trunk, and she's I bet there's a bag in there. I bet he's the serial killer. This is dangerous. This is the wrong choice. And then she still does it anyways. And it's just why couldn't you just wait 2 days? I don't really understand that. She continuously makes bad choices in this book. There are correct, obvious answers, and she just doesn't go for. So Charlie's just very unlikable in that way. I know that this is often not people's favorite, and I agree. But I don't think I'd like this more than I think a lot of other people do. Most people give this book either 2 stars or 5 stars, and I think I gave it 4. I mean, I still really, really enjoy the book, and even for as much as Charlie was getting on my nerves, I was listening to this audiobook and I would get so annoyed with her and I'd have to pause it, and then I would just immediately start listening to it again because I really wanted to know what happened. I still think it's a really good book. I think it's definitely worth your time. I think especially if you know going in that Charlie is not the most likable character, I think you'll still really have a good time with this. Now, I think this is where I'm gonna lose some people, but number 6 is The Last Time I Lied. This story follows Emma, who was a camper at this summer camp called Camp Nightingale, and the summer she went, her 3 bunkmates or cabin mates all disappeared and have never been seen since. That was about 20 years ago, and Emma is now a famous painter, and the owner of the camp, Francesca, wants to reopen it for some reason and is asking Emma to come and be like the art instructor at the camp. And Emma is scared to go back, but she feels like she can't really turn it down because she kind of feels like indebted to Francesca. She really wants to know what happened to her friends who, have been missing for 20 years. So she goes back, and while she's there, there's lots of other people who are back at the camp who were either campers when she was there or were instructors when she was there. And the camp's also owned by like this big family, so that families are there, and she used to have a crush on one of the guys who was in the family, and he's there, and so she's coming back to investigate and figure out what happened. She gets there and she realizes that not only is she gonna be like an instructor, but like she has to live in the same cabin that she was in the night that her friends all went missing, and she has to like stay with like 3 campers who are teenagers, and she's like in her 30s. She feels like she's being watched, and she needs to figure out what happened to her missing friends. This book has really, really strong summer vibes, so if you're looking for like a summer thriller, this is a really, really good one. It has really great like camp, like lake camp atmosphere. There's like multiple scenes of them like hiking and like swimming in this big lake, and the mystery is really, really good as well. Again, I really like all of these books. Like, just because this is number 6 does not mean that I didn't like it, because I did. I really, really liked it, and I recommend this book all the time. It's just not my favorite. So yeah, I really, really liked this. I really enjoyed it. I think I gave it 4 stars or 4.5. I don't remember. I'm pretty sure all of these books are 4 stars, or 5. The ending I was not super into. I mean, it's definitely a unique ending, and I liked that it wasn't like the same, missing woman's ending that we've read 100 times. It's unique, and I appreciate that. I think I just felt a little unsatisfied with it, but like overall the book is still really, really good. Number 5 is Final Girls. This is Riley Sager's debut novel. This book follows Quincy, who was on a trip. She was like on a vacation into the cabin, into this remote cabin with her friends, and they kind of invite this like guy along who they don't really know. Something happens and everybody dies. Everybody gets murdered except for Quincy, so she's the final girl. And she kind of gets lumped in the media with these 2 other women who are also the lone survivors of like certain massacres that they were a part of. Over the years, they're constantly, lumped together and compared, and eventually one of these other final girls who she kind of becomes close to dies in a mysterious way, and she's convinced that she was murdered, even though the media is trying to play it like a suicide. Her and the other final girl are investigating and trying to prove that, their friend didn't die by suicide, that she was in fact murdered. I had a hard time placing this book because this book is a dual timeline, and the timeline in present day is like interesting enough, like it's pretty generic thriller, but the past timeline with the massacre that Quincy was a part of, that was amazing. I loved it so much. I wish I could have just read just that book, and that would have been like a full 5 stars for me. But overall, like, this is really, really good. So I just had a hard time placing it in my list because like there are some parts of this book that I absolutely loved, and some parts that I still enjoyed but just weren't my favorite. So that's kind of why I ended up like in the middle for me. Again, I truly love all of these books. I think Riley Sager is my favorite author. Definitely recommend this one if you haven't read it. It's so good. Okay, and number 4 is The House Across the Lake. This was his release in 2022. I think some people are going to be a little surprised that it made it this high on my list because just like Survive the Night, this is one of his books that people are very divided on. People really love it or they really hate it, and I really, really liked it. This book follows Casey, who is an actress or was an actress, and she's kind of had a public meltdown recently. She's drinking way too much because her husband has passed away in a pretty tragic way, and she's kind of dealing with that, and because she's a celebrity, she's kind of dealing with it publicly, and so she's, you know, drinking a little too much, kind of making a fool of herself in public, and so her family kind of sends her to this cabin that her and her husband owned, saying like, hey, get it together, you know, work through your stuff alone in this cabin. And while she's there, she is not really working through her stuff, she's just drinking a lot more. Catherine and her husband are staying at this house across the lake, and one day Casey is on her deck and she sees Catherine drown in this lake. Catherine's swimming and she's, you know, not coming back up, and Casey goes in and saves her. And then after that, they kind of strike up this friendship. After a while, Catherine is missing, and Casey starts to suspect that the husband has something to do with her disappearance. There's also like a series of murders that have happened over the past several years in this area, and nobody knows if it's like one guy or if it's just like or if it just this happens to just happen there sometimes, because it is a little bit of a touristy town. I really enjoyed this. I think this is a really great summer read. My only gripe with this book is that it's long and it takes a while to get going. It takes a little bit for the mystery to start happening, but I think that totally makes sense. There is just like a lot of backstory in this that you need to know for all of the twists to make sense. This is the one that took me the longest to read, and it only took me like 3 days. This is another one that people have mixed feelings about because it utilizes a very divisive twist. Kind of breaks my heart a little bit when people like really hate it, but I think this book was really fun. I think you gotta go into Riley Sager's books looking for like a fun time and not necessarily like looking for like, you know, the most shocking, you know, most well-written book. I think his books are super fun, and this is one that's like really, really fun. Number 3 is Lock Every Door. I loved this book. When I read this book, I devoured it in like a day. I was obsessed. I loved this book. This book follows Jules, who is in need of work, and she finds a job offering that is house sitting in this like very wealthy apartment building called the Bartholomew in New York City. She goes in for the interview and she's like really stoked about it, but the job has a lot of really strange rules. She's not allowed to have any friends over in the apartment. She's not allowed to spend a night away from the apartment. She's also not allowed to talk to any of the neighbors. Jules learns that there are a couple other apartment sitters in this building. The apartment sitter who is in the unit that she's currently working in went missing, and she's kind of interested in like how that happened, like what happened with that, and so is another one of the apartment sitters who she does make friends with, even though she's not supposed to, but she does become friends with another one, and then that friend also goes missing. Jules starts to investigate and figure out what it is about this building where these apartment sitters have like this dream job, but they just keep disappearing. I loved this story, and honestly, this book sticks with me so much because I read it, and then a few months later I read Rosemary's Baby and realized that this book is heavily inspired by Rosemary's Baby. Both feature like creepy apartment buildings with like weird neighbors who, you know, there seems to be more going on in this, you know, very luxurious apartment building than meets the eye. This is one of his much more popular ones, and rightfully so. This book is great. I love it. This book has very strong fall vibes. It takes place in New York City in the fall, and there's like a lot of talk about the changing leaves and just like how pretty the fall is and how crisp the air is. So if you're looking for a fall book, this is a good one. My number 2 pick is The Only One Left. Now, this is Riley Sager's newest release. It came out this month. I mean, at the time that I'm filming this, it came out like a week ago, and I love this book. I love it so much. This book is based on the Lizzie Borden case, which is a very famous true crime case, and there's definitely a lot of elements to that case in here, and she's also explicitly mentioned in this book as well. This book follows Kit, who is a caretaker, not a nurse, but kind of like a hospice nurse, but not technically a nurse. She has been out of work for a little while due to an incident that she was a part of. The only position that she's being offered at her, at her job, is to take care of Lenora Hope, who is a very famous woman in their town who is believed to have murdered her entire family. Lenora was the sole survivor of a massacre in their home, and everybody thinks that Lenora did it. Her mother, her father, and her sister all perished that night, and everybody seems to think that it was Lenora who did it because she was the only one around, but the police could never prove it, and she was never prosecuted or anything. But now she is bedridden, and she's mostly paralyzed due to like series of strokes and I think polio. The house is also very creepy. It has really not been updated since the 20s. This book takes place in the 80s, by the way, so it's been like 50 years. So it's this crumbling estate like on a cliff, and so there's tons of like creepy house vibes. While Kit is taking care of her, Lenora starts like to type on this typewriter and say that she wants to tell Kit what really happened that night. And so Kit is getting to find out like what really happened that night, and Lenora is telling her story for the first time. It's like a creepy gothic house, true crime, big mystery. There's a mystery with Lenora, there's a mystery in, well, what did Kit do to get, put in this position, because nobody else will take on this job. Lenora has had lots of nurses over the years, and people quit all the time because they just don't want to be in a murder mansion. I mean, the house is like literally falling off of a cliff. So the house is so old and decrepit that like you step on the second floor and there's like noticeable slant. She wakes up every morning and her mattress is like completely moved. People don't want to work there, but she doesn't really have a choice because of the situation that she has found herself in. The twist in this book is so good. When I got to that twist, I had to stop and try to like reevaluate the book that I thought that I was reading, because it's one of those twists that fundamentally changes the plot of this book so much, but it's so good. I loved it. Number one, you already know what it is because there's only one left, and it's Home Before Dark. This book follows Maggie, who moved into this house with her family when she was 5. That this house is seemingly haunted. It has a long history of people not wanting to stay there, of people dying there. The people who lived in the house before them also had a very tragic incident happen. And so her family moves into this house because it's super cheap. It's very, very inexpensive for them to buy this house, and their family only stays in it for 20 days. And the story picks up, 20 years later, 25 years later, when Maggie is an adult, and she finds out that her father never sold the house. He passes away and leaves the house to her. Her father also wrote a best-selling book about the events in that house, and so she's kind of famous more or less about like when people find out her name, they recognize her, and they say, oh, you're the family that stayed in that creepy house. Like, was it real? Was it not? He says that the house was haunted, and it kind of details all of the hauntings that they experienced over those 3 weeks. And Maggie does not believe that it was real. She thinks that her father made it up for money. She inherits the house, and she also does like reconstruction on homes. So she's like, you know what, I'm gonna fix up the house, and I'm gonna sell it because it's a really big, beautiful house. She goes there and she starts kind of experiencing things in the house that aren't easily explained. Is it paranormal, or is there a reasonable explanation for things? This story is inspired by The Haunting of Hill House. So it's that kind of vibe house-wise. But the real strength of this book is that you get chapters from, Maggie's perspective, and then every other chapter is from the book that her dad wrote and sold. And so you're getting all of those experiences from his perspective, but you don't know if they're real or not. This might be my favorite book of all time. It's so good. I love this book. This book really hits like every single trope that I like. This book is incredible. I think everybody should read this. Everybody should read this book. Okay, so that is my ranking of the 7 Riley Sager books. Let me know if you guys feel the same way, if you have a different order, if you think I'm totally wrong and you think that Survive the Night should be number 1. Let me know. Leave a comment and tell me what order you would put these books in. Let me know if there's any authors that you think I should do other rankings of. Riley Sager is the only author that I have read all of his releases, but eventually I want to do more ranking videos like this, so let me know if there's any other authors that you want to hear rankings of their books.